So my name is Ken Marone. I work for Central Connecticut State University, and for the last 8 years I have managed the Connecticut Racial Profiling Prohibition Project for the state of Connecticut. I've also managed the Racial Profiling Initiative for the state of Rhode Island, and I've also helped the states of California and Oregon implement racial profiling laws there as well. And tonight we are going to talk a little bit about what the project is, what the state law is, and some of the research that we've done around this topic. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to talk tonight about the Racial Profiling Prohibition Project, racial profiling, and I'm going to come at this from a more statistical and analytical perspective, and that is, what does data tell us? And before we get into that, I think we have to talk a little bit about the brief history of racial profiling, the racial profiling law here in the state of Connecticut. In 1999, the Connecticut General Assembly passed a law prohibiting law enforcement from profiling, from using race, gender, ethnicity, or membership in a protected class as the sole reason for stopping an individual in the state of Connecticut. We use what we call the preponderance of the evidence approach, which means we try to come up with as many different ways as we can think of to analyze police department's data every year. The idea is that if your police department keeps showing up with statistical disparities, meaning you're stopping more of one group than the measure should indicate, you keep showing up regardless of how we look at the data or slice and dice it, then that is likely a department that we need to take a further look at. One of the things that Connecticut started doing that no other state did was we didn't simply put out an annual report and walk away. We don't simply just point the finger at departments and say, okay, we'll see you again next year and we have to do this analysis again. But we actually go in to those police departments we identify and we drill down and we ask for more information and we try and figure out why is policing done in this neighborhood differently than this neighborhood, and why does this group of people in this neighborhood get this outcome from a traffic stop and this community gets a different outcome? Why do you only run license plates over here or only focus on speeding over here? And how does crime and calls for service and accidents and traffic volume, all these complex factors play a role in how you enforce the laws within your community? And then we come up with recommendations. We say to the police, these are the factors that we believe are driving disparities in your community. These are the things that you should focus on addressing in order to address that disparity. Some of the general statistics from just some of our general findings over the last 4 years. Consistently, we have found that race and ethnicity of drivers is a significant factor in traffic stops. Every year, we've identified that. I think we've proven it beyond a reasonable doubt. Minority drivers are disproportionately stopped and disproportionately searched compared to white drivers. Minority drivers receive different outcomes after the stop is made, even after we consider the reason for the stop. So when we look at drivers who are stopped for the same reason, we see the outcomes are different. Police are significantly less likely to find contraband resulting from a search involving a minority driver. So minority drivers are significantly more likely to be searched, and contraband is found at a significantly lower rate. And minority drivers are significantly more likely to be stopped for equipment and administrative offenses. And these are the types of stops that have historically been considered pretext stops. We can talk about that a little more later. And officers tend to have more discretion when determining to stop a vehicle for those violations. Since 2015, we've identified 28 municipal police agencies and 5 state police troops that have been identified with statistically significant disparities that we've gone in, done that deeper dive in. We've identified 10 in Hartford County, 9 in Fairfield County, 5 in New Haven County, 2 in New London County, 1 in Middlesex County, and 1 in Litchfield County. We have not found any in Windham County, although you don't have many municipal police departments in this part of the state. The power of data, right? The power of data in these conversations, and I'm going to choose the Newington, the first example about equipment disparities in this connection to DWI enforcement. Some things that we learned when we look at data, we identified the Newington Police Department, I think the second year we did our study. They had a really significant number of really statistically significant racial disparity. When we drilled down on their data, one of the things we noticed was that the vast majority of Black and Hispanic drivers that were stopped were being stopped for low-level equipment-related violations, particularly defective lighting. We're talking a license plate light being out, a brake light, a tail light, maybe one headlight being out. And so we went to the department, we tried to understand what the enforcement strategy was. And what the department told us was that this was part of their roving DUI patrol. And so they would send officers out during peak drinking hours, about 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. And they would tell their officers, stop cars for whatever low-level reason you can think of. And that's a good way to interact with the driver. Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? Have you had a drink tonight? No? Okay. Just so you know, your brake light light's out. Your license plate light is out. And so they viewed that as a good way of trying to address the drinking and driving problem in their community. So the next logical question was, is this effective? We know that it is causing a significant racial disparity. We don't know if you're getting a lot of drunk drivers through this strategy. And the department didn't know. And so we said, well, would you mind if we looked? And so they said, no problem, we think you'll find a lot of drunk drivers. And so we went back and we evaluated. In a 12-month period, they made 1,608 traffic stops for low-level defective lighting violations. Just to put that in context, because sometimes we don't know if that's a lot or a little. The police department made 740 speeding stops in the same 12-month time period. So it was by far the number one reason in that community for stopping drivers. When we went back to the department, the conversation we had was, you know, how many drunk drivers would you have to find in order to justify, in your mind, as the police chief or the police administrator, this method being effective? And what the chief said was about 10%. So, okay, so we're looking at about 150 to about 160. That's my time. This is my last slide. At the end of my story. About 150 to 160 drivers would have to be identified as intoxicated. And we went around the table and I said, how many people do you think you identified that were in fact intoxicated? And they all believed in that room that close to 150 individuals had been identified as driving under the influence. And they were surprised to learn when we presented the data to them that in fact only one driver had been identified as driving under the influence. And of the 740 speeding stops, they found 13 drunk drivers. And of the 400 or so stops made for people crossing the double yellow line, they found close to 30 drunk drivers. And so the power of data is that, you know, you can take this old assumption that you go out and you saturate a community with enforcement, you stop cars for low-level reasons, and that's how you get drunks and guns and drugs off the street. Now it can be measured, and you can say, okay, well, let's figure out if that's true. And if it's not true, the department is put in a position where they have to potentially rework their enforcement strategy. And in fact, they did. And in fact, a year later, their racial and ethnic disparity virtually disappeared. And as I like to say, you know, I think the old adage is slow and steady wins the race. We've been at this now for 8 years. We've produced 4 statewide reports. We work with 28 municipal police departments. We're producing our 5th statewide report in 2 weeks. And this is a little preview of that report. But the findings from the 2018 analysis, which is coming out in 2 weeks, indicate that progress continues to be made in terms of the decision to stop a minority motorist. The short version is that the racial disparities that we're seeing today are getting smaller than they were 5 years ago. They're not gone. They haven't disappeared. We can't all pat ourselves on the back yet. But they're finally trending in the right direction. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we've just been methodically identifying departments and chipping away at some of the factors that are driving larger racial and ethnic disparities. And so we have a project website, ctrp3.org. We have lots of reports. You can look at data from your particular community, in your particular town. During our conversation, I'll share some other stories and ways that the data has worked, and I can also engage you in a bit of a conversation around Willimantic in particular, if you'd like. I'm going to pause the presentation now, and I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists this evening if they wouldn't mind. We'll start here with Rodney, introducing themselves, sharing a little bit about the organization they represent or the organization they work for, and maybe if you want to just provide any feedback or thoughts you have on the presentation. wonderful way to kick us off.
Good evening, everybody. Excuse me. My name is Rodney Alexander. I'm our first vice president with the Windham Willimantic branches and NAACP. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this forum today. And as the NAACP goes, we are huge on any type of discrimination whatsoever, from our children all the way through adults, from education, from racial profiling, housing, the laws, anything. When I was first asked on this, I was caught a little bit off guard. So I said, okay, I'm here. You know, that was a joke, folks. You can laugh. You know, and racial profiling as a whole is huge. Because there's a thing, I'm going to piggyback on one of the slides Ken showed about DWB. And I think I qualified driving while black. Because out here, I can't hide, I still got a light like a sore thumb. And the rest of our young men and older men of color too. So if we're cruising through, say, Thompson Hill Road, very good chance we're going to get stopped. Because that's a nice place, nice homes there. I was just out there this past week because the bridge was closed. And I had come through here to get to work. And the lady was coming towards me, actually slowed down to a stop as I passed. I'm like, dude, I'm too old for this. But he let me go, you know, but someone else who knows. You know, we haven't received too many complaints on profiling or any forms of harassment. If there are any, please contact us. The easiest way to reach us is through our email and our website, which is on Facebook. So please feel free to reach out. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it on to Sue.
Thank you so much, Rodney, and thank you, Ken, for a great beginning of the presentation. The information from the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy is very, very helpful on all different types of issues. I've been to some of their presentations, and they do great work. And as a state representative, I want to know all I can about how we can address all different types of issues in municipalities. As a former council person, we were formerly known as members of the Board of Selectmen. The issue of racial profiling was something that was relatively new back in the 90s. We began addressing it back then. And so I had some familiarity with it. I served with Mark Shapiro, who was a public defender. And he was very, very interested in racial profiling from that perspective. And one thing that he said as well is people being stopped, but what happens afterwards? What is the protocol the police follows afterwards? And I think that is something that's really important and something that Ken has pointed out today. Are they searched? Or are they just giving a warning? What are the circumstances? Those are the kinds of things we want to analyze when we see the data from the Racial Profiling Institute. Having them here, making sure that they monitor what's going on in respect to racial profiling all throughout the state, so we have a capacity to compare and contrast what we're doing here, what other communities are doing, and we can make sure that we're in a situation that we are continuously correcting how our protocols are, what the reasons are. We of course want to maintain road safety, we want to make sure people have the right equipment, but on the other hand, we do not want to treat anyone differently than the other. So these things are really, really important, and they're a good way for us to try and correct a lot of the difficulties that people have gone into. So with that, I will pass this along to our next panel member from the CHRO.
Good evening. I'm Alex Willimantic from the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. I'm here for Cheryl Sharp, the Deputy Director. She was unable to be here tonight, so she sends her request for not being able to be here. But hopefully, we're going to be able to bring her energy to this evening. The Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities is a state's agency that protects against discrimination. And we receive numbers of different kinds of complaints. Employment complaints are we also receive housing and public accommodation and credit and other types of complaints. The commission's mission is also, we are the oldest commission, state commission in the country. The commission's mission is to eliminate discrimination through civil and human rights law enforcement and to establish equal opportunity and justice for all persons within the state through advocacy and education. We protect against discrimination on a number of different protected statuses. They include that they're not limited to age, alienage, ancestry, breastfeeding, color, familial responsibility, status of planning, gender identity or expression, use of a guide dog for persons with disabilities, lawful source of income, learning disability, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race. There are more. Okay. Religious creed, retaliation, sex, including pregnancy, sexual orientation, and veteran status. That's our most recent. Our function in large part is to be available to the public when you believe you've been discriminated against. We are the offices where you file complaints and have the complaints processed. So we are located throughout the state. We're in Bridgeport, in Norwich. Norwich would be local to you. And you'll find that these brochures are in the back and they have all of our local regional office locations so that if you encounter any problems, then you can contact us if you feel your rights have been violated. We also have offices in Waterbury and Hartford, and we also have a special office to receive housing complaints in Hartford. Our central office is in Hartford. It is really important if you do feel that your rights have been violated that you speak out, and if you feel that you wish to file a complaint, please contact us.
Thank you, Alex. And so before we jump into the public portion, I'd just like to ask each member a different question, and I'm writing a little, you don't mind, but I'll start with you. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, from your perspective, both being a member of the community and an active member of your local NAACP, if you could talk about the relationship, the perception of law enforcement in this community, and what role trust plays in the development of good police-community relations.
Okay. Everybody knows that things between the Willimantic Police Force and the Willimantic branch of the NAACP has been a little tight. There's been, should I say, strain. Because of our rally we had back in July in support of Mr. and Mrs. Sands for answers for their son who was killed. And prior to that, our relationship was excellent. You know, the major part of the NAACP, when there's a complaint or a concern, we have an obligation to the community, to their family, to speak up. You're not always going to make the best friends, you know, but that doesn't stop us from pursuing rights. Everybody here has civil rights. So, of course, we're not going to always be on the right side of the fence, should I say. But our motives are honest, they're genuine. You know, we're still trying to repair that. We're in the process of that. We're still trying. Because this branch, and every branch that I know of from the NAACP has a very high amount of respect for the law enforcement. We have to work together. But we need the community's help too with this. See, there should be a joint effort all the way around between the police, the community, and the NAACP. Perfect triangle. So with that being said, again, I reach out to the community. So let's try to repair things. Let's have open discussions. So we can get your voice out. And so everybody concerned and involved can come up with a solution to whatever problems you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. Representative Johnson, I wonder if you could maybe reflect a little bit on, you've been in the legislature now for the better part of 10 years, and also a member of the town council and a local leader for a number of years before that. I wonder if you could share with us the role that you think the legislature has historically played or should continue to play in addressing the issue of profiling. And in particular, I also wonder if you have any thoughts about, over the last number of years, there's been a push at the legislature to try and help police departments become more diverse and hire more individuals that live within the community, so that law enforcement individuals represent the communities they serve. And I just wonder your thoughts on that type of policy, or the role the legislature should even play in that type of policy.
So I think that the role that the legislature plays, and no matter if it's in this type of situation to analyze, or whatever it is that we do, we need data. We need to find out from the community what's going on. Each of us needs to be connected with our communities to find out how they operate. Then what I like to do is to go and find out what other communities are doing, which is why I like your organization, what you've been doing in terms of providing an analysis when you have to solve a problem that is so ingrained in society. We have to move from one kind of situation out of it. It's dysfunctional. Then we need data. We need to have policy. We need to continue to fund your organization. I said on appropriations. So that's one of the things that we need to continue to do. In terms of one of the things that when we started hearing a lot about police brutality and those kinds of things, I talked to Chief Rosado. I said, well, what's going on in these places where these things are occurring? And he said, well, a lot of them hire from out of state. They hire from all around. They don't hire necessarily within the community. Here, he says he prefers hiring within the community because he knows who the people are. They have that reputation. So that's one of the things that I think is very, very important. Make sure that the police force reflects the population that it serves. Make sure that people know who is being hired in the police force. And we, the legislature should do our best to make sure that we provide the training. One of the things that I learned in law school is that one way to eliminate a lot of the problems with discrimination and people being treated unfairly has to do with training. So what the legislature needs to do, and what we need to continue to do, is make sure that every single police officer has the right amount of training. Training is one way to end discrimination. And that is something that we need to make sure that we never cut the budget for training. When I see that, I complain. When I see them trying to cut the budget when I'm in appropriations for training purposes, for police officers, for fire, no matter what it is, training helps broaden the view of the person that's operating in that particular position, and they need to be able to continue to have regular training so that they don't fall back into maybe the culture that isn't quite focused on the way that they should be operating in that particular job. So they really need to make sure that they are trained properly. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to continue to discuss, and I'd be glad to work with you where we look at racial profiling and take a look at what is the training for all these places, particularly the 28 places that you point out that have a little bit more than they should have in terms of profiling issues. So, and they should have none actually, so let me just be clear. They should have no profiling at all. It should just be all based on, what the behavior of the driver is, for example. So I would say that the best thing that we can do in the legislature is to continue to make sure that access to training for people who are in these jobs is really, really important. The hiring procedures are all set. another thing that we need to look at and keep up to date on, to make sure that the training, the hiring, how the police officers are chosen, what their training procedures are, making sure that everybody gets the same kind of conditioning, so that when they are finally out in the street, that they are doing the right thing for the community and providing the right services. So,
Thank you. Thank you for that. And just a quick comment. Although there's, I keep indicating there's still a lot of work to be done on this issue. One of the reasons for these public forums is that we have been meeting as an advisory board every month and presenting a lot of interesting data, learning a lot, and producing these big, thick academic reports. And the advisory board started to say, you know, it's great that we're learning more and we're helping to craft better policy, but do we have a good beat on the communities that are being impacted by this? And are we listening to the members of the public so that we can understand what their perspective is? Because sometimes, you know, sitting, you know, at a university and running lots of numbers and looking at data is disconnected from what's happening in the real world. And so the advisory board turned to us and said, you know, you need to get out there. And it's one of the reasons for us hosting, why we began to host these forums around the state. That being said, I do this work in a number of states. The Connecticut legislature has much more comprehensive laws, civil rights laws, and laws to help us at least start to wrap our arms around this topic than the vast majority of other states in the country. And I think that's at least, you know, some good news here in Connecticut. So now, just to turn things over to Alex, one of the things I want to point out first is that part of the law that was passed in 2012 requires that every single person that's stopped, regardless of the outcome of the stop, whether you get a ticket or a verbal warning or a written warning or some other disposition, you're supposed to receive this, and we can pass it around with some copies of it, 3x5 card. It's mandatory. And it's a card that's in both English and in Spanish, and it informs individuals of their right to file a complaint if they believe that they have, if they've been profiled. And it directs them to both their local police department if they prefer to file an internal complaint there, or it directs them to the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, both their phone number and their website, which is another avenue that individuals can file a complaint in order to seek remedy for what they believe to be is discrimination. So, but I think Anna will pass these out, but Alex, I wonder if you could just help educate folks in the room today. What is that process? What do I do if I was stopped and I feel as though I was discriminated against? If I want to contact the CHRO, how would that work? What would the process look like?
If a person feels they've been discriminated against or they've been treated differently because of protected status, then they can file a complaint with us. We have a couple of options. One, as I mentioned before, the brochures in the back, but you can just contact us looking at the internet. ct.gov/CHRO is our website, and there's an icon, contacts, and it'll let you know where our regional offices are and the contact information for each of the offices and the towns that complaints would be filed in, what regional office they would go to. We have 169 towns, so we kind of split up the regions to capture the different towns. And you really should go to the regional office that's applicable, but you can also get them by looking at the brochures in the back of the room. And a complaint would be filed with us, and then when we receive it, we serve it on the respondent, which be the police department or whomever it is that the person would be complaining against. Then an answer is received from the respondent, and the complainant is the complainant, the respondent is the entity against whom a complaint would be filed. And then we conduct a case assessment review, which is a preliminary review, to determine essentially if the complaints are jurisdictional, if it's a completely different type of complaint than discrimination, it wouldn't be jurisdictional. If a case is retained, then it goes on into mandatory mediation. That's really important. Our mission is to eliminate discrimination, and a lot of times discrimination can be addressed quickly through mediation. So the process is that the complaints, all the complaints that are retained have to go through a mediation process. If they're successful, they're resolved. If they're not successful, they go on into another area of process. Generally, the complaints would be investigated, although there's also the option of legal intervention, which can be requested by the parties. And the commission can also direct the complaint to early intervention. If a complaint goes through our investigation and reasonable cause is determined, then the case would attempt again to be resolved through conciliation. If the complaint is not found to have reasonable cause, it would be dismissed. If it is found to have reasonable cause and conciliation is unsuccessful, then it would be certified to public hearing. And we have an adjudicated tribunal where cases are actually tried before an administrative law judge. And our human rights referees, who are our administrative law judges, are fully authorized to make determinations of unlawful discrimination and to award relief as they deem appropriate.
Great, thank you. And I think one of the most important parts is that if you feel as though you've been discriminated against or profiled, you can file a complaint with the CHRO. It will cost you nothing. So you don't have to go out and hire a lawyer. You have a lot of really smart lawyers that work there and will evaluate your case and represent you. So it's a venue available to all individuals. And hopefully tonight, if you didn't know that, you know that now. So thank you. With that, I'd like to, because it's important, we're here to hear from you and to answer your questions and to listen to you. So I'd like to turn it over at this point to the audience. What I would ask is raise your hands. I'll try and call on people one at a time. Because this is being recorded both on television and for our own purposes, so we can put it on our website so members of the advisory board can later watch, is that you just step up to the microphone if you could. If it's just a quick question and you'd like me to, if you want to ask the question from your seat, I'll repeat it just so that it gets recorded. If you have a statement or a comment that you'd like to make, the microphone will just be better so that folks in the room can hear. If you have a comment, I just ask you to try and keep it to about 2 minutes. And then if you have a question, if you have a specific person you want to answer it, or you just put a question out there and we'll see who it best fits. So with that, I will turn it over to you.
Quick comment for the question. When you get stopped by the police, it's a form. If you black, they put B. White, double, Hispanic, A. How was you? Put not. Because he say, they give me, when I get a ticket, good ticket for speeding, a ticket. They say, James, blah, 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 and the letter U, I say, why you mean? No, I say, you can put me Hispanic or black. How about no? You look like a black to me, black African, black Jamaican, black Cuban. Then he put you. That happened 10 years ago. I went out of the community because I'm a community activist. I collect tickets, like 20 Latino tickets, and only 5 was Latino, Hispanic. The rest was you. Now I discovered Willimantic, we have a 4 race, black, white, Hispanic, and you. My question is, how can you keep your statistic when the 4 race in this town is, or other town is you?
Really good question. And thank you for bringing that up. You is no longer an option. Police are not allowed to, starting in 2013 when we rewrote the law, we noticed the same thing you noticed. We went in to look at those departments that were collecting data, and the police were using you an awful lot for unknown. You stood for unknown. And so it's sort of a way of not, white, black, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native, all sorts of categories, and you, which is sort of a backdoor to, and as a researcher, it was useless data. I couldn't do anything with you. And so that was actually one of the more challenging things that we did when we rewrote the law, because law enforcement really wanted to yield. They didn't want to have to report. And so there's also an important distinction in the law. Police officers are required to report their perception of the driver, not necessarily how you self-identify. Let me just tell you why I believe that's important. People identify as a variety of different, members of a variety of different racial and ethnic groups. But oftentimes, the way in which people are perceived is in a far narrower number of groups. And if an individual is going to treat somebody differently based on their race or ethnicity, they're going to do it based on their perception of who you are, not based on how you self-identify. And so in the state of Connecticut, police are required. The system has now been built so they can't do what you mentioned. There's no back door. They can't clear the stop in their physical system within their computer until every field is filled out. White, Black, Asian Pacific Islander, American, Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, Hispanic, or not Hispanic. So the next question comes, because I think maybe this is the next question that might come, how much do we trust the data that's being reported? Okay, so we did away with the you, the unknown. How do we make sure police aren't just putting white down for everybody, right? Well, there's a few ways we are able to check against that. One is that when motorists are given a ticket, right, not a warning or a warning, but a ticket, the race and ethnicity of the driver is on the ticket, and the individual receives a copy of the ticket. So the idea is that police are probably going to be less likely to, right, if somebody is very clearly not white, report white on a ticket, right, because the individual is going to see that in my question. So one of the things we do is we compare. We go to the state. We say we want to see every ticket that was submitted this year, and we were going to compare for, say, the Willimantic Police Department, what the racial breakdown was on everybody that received a ticket. We also do random audits. So we go into the department. Every single police officer that stops a cop has to call that stop into dispatch. It's standard operating procedure. You pull over a car before you even get out of the car. You're calling dispatch and you're saying, I'm at this location. I stopped at car number 1234. For X. And the dispatchers keep a log, a record of it. Okay? And then when they get back to the car, they have to call into dispatch and provide dispatch with a bunch of information. That's not information we get. We get the information the officer then enters on this profile form. But again, we'll go to dispatch and we'll pull the numbers and we will say, okay, why is it that you told dispatch these 3 individuals were black males, but then right your form was 2 white males and 1 black, for example. So we conducted a number of audits to ensure that the quality of data is good. And the last point is, and this is sort of the cynical point that I make whenever this comes up, is, if there was some sort of a conspiracy amongst 9,000 police officers in the state of Connecticut, or even right within a department, to try and fudge the numbers, they're not doing a very good job. We find it just makes the disparities even worse than what we've already found. In Willimantic in particular, there is a fairly sizable disparity, although because of the way that our system is designed, Willimantic hasn't met our threshold for further analysis, but you're about twice as likely if you're a Hispanic resident in Willimantic to be stopped than a white resident. And so of the residents stopped, that's a fairly big disparity. So the disparity is smaller. There is a disparity for black drivers, particularly black residents. But the disparity in Willimantic really seems to be centered on Hispanic motorists and in particular Hispanic residents. So it's not necessarily being influenced by out-of-town drivers. It's drivers that already live in the town. And that is likely something that the community maybe should grapple with. So I hope I answered your question. If anybody else has a comment on the panel, they're welcome to comment. If not, we'll move on. Okay, thank you.
So I have a comment and a question too. So recently I was reading a book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, and in the book she talks about the war on drugs, which is actually more like a war on people of color and the war on the poor. And in my job I deliver pizzas, so I drive around Willimantic and I started to notice where the cops are sitting in Willimantic. So the three major places that every single day I see at least one cop in: Jeffrey Street, Windham Heights Apartments, Cameo Drive up the road here, and West Ave. If you drive into those areas, you see that majority of the people there are people of color, and they're the more impoverished area in town. If you drive other places in town, you don't see as many cops except for on Main Street because the police station's right there. So my question is, how do you decide where the cops are going to sit without it becoming an easy ground for racial profiling when majority of cops sit in these neighborhoods that are all people of color?
Really good question. Thank you. I'll just respond, and I don't want to let Rodney just get a comment to make, and then we'll move on to our next question. The reasons why police place people where they do are sort of, right, they differ by community. Leadership makes different decisions based on traffic volume, right? Roads that have more cars might get more attention, neighborhoods with more crime, areas where there's more accidents, areas where people call 911 at a higher rate. Typically, it's not that hard to understand why police are where they are, but one of the things we've learned is that the nature of policing changes pretty dramatically from white communities to black or brown communities. And then trying to understand why the nature of policing changes and the benefit of that, we haven't found a ton of benefits. And so let me just provide you with it, so I'd share some stories. Another example. We found in the city of Waterbury that a significant number of Hispanic drivers were being stopped on unregistered vehicles. And the police chief at the time said, well, it's because, it's a socioeconomic issue, right? And so Hispanic individuals in our community are lower socioeconomic status, they have less money, it costs money to register your car, and so they don't register their cars, and our cops run plates, and they find unregistered cars. And the question became, well, where are you running plates? Are you only going into the predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, which is what it appears in the data, and running plates, or are you running them equally throughout the city, and that just happens to be where you're fighting more unregistered? And they said, well, why would we go waste our time, in neighborhood A, because that's not the poor neighborhood, the unregistered vehicles are going to be where the poor people live. Okay, so the question then became, all right, I understand the logic you're using, I don't agree with it, but I get it. But, is that true? Are the individuals in that particular neighborhood that happen to be predominantly Hispanic more likely to be driving around unregistered vehicles than the people on the other side of town? And up to this point, it's sort of anecdotal. It's like, yeah, of course that's the case. So we went, we did an experiment. And what we found was that when predominantly white communities are exposed to the same type of enforcement, in the case of Waterbury, when police go into white communities with license plate readers and run just as many places they do in the predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, in the case of Waterbury, they found that white drivers were 7% more likely to be driving around an unregistered vehicle than the drivers in the Hispanic neighborhood, right? So it became sort of weird. Well, why are you always running plates in the Hispanic neighborhood? And so some of these things, I think, law enforcement were able to get away with for a while because there was never anybody to challenge it, and what they were saying seemed logical. People would look and go, okay, I guess that's the case, right? And so some of what we're trying to do is to not tell law enforcement, don't place resources where you feel you need them, but you need to articulate, both internally and externally, what is your goal? If your goal is, this neighborhood has the most crime, so I have to place 3 cops in that neighborhood, okay? And the goal is to do what? Is to reduce crime X. What strategy are you using? What are the unintended consequences or intended consequences of that strategy? And then you have to measure how effective it is. So if it's not effective, and you're just catching all of these drivers in your wide net that you're catching, that you put out there, then maybe that's a strategy that needs to be retooled. And like I said, unfortunately, in Willimantic, this is not a part of the state that we've spent a ton of time on, mostly because, right, like I said in the beginning, triage. It's unfortunate this evening, it's always helpful when people ask questions at that level that a representative of the police department be here to try and help. I don't know the areas you're talking about, and to be able to sort of talk about the reasons why, they might have had more officers patrolling that road or in that neighborhood. And the attend this evening, or we might have been able to sort of engage in a discussion. So just Ronnie, and then we'll get to you.
All right, quick one. This goes back to driving while brown or while black, because it was a term that came up in the 90s, and it was specifically geared. It was public knowledge that American police officers were intentionally targeting racial minorities to curb the drug trafficking problems that their cities had. This is where it came from. For example, New Jersey released state documents, I'm going back all the way to the year 2000. So when you want to implement change, you got to start to undo a whole lot of stuff that's been ingrained to get back to piggyback on what Susan said. Imagine the year 2000, 20 years later, which showed police training memos instructing officers to make racial judgments in order to identify occupants, identifiers for a possible drug occurring. We as people of color have been targeted. Another way that we can start to change this is when positions open up on your local police force, state police. The FBI actually has a mentoring program for students, both high school and college. And you're looking, the FBI especially, is looking for people of color to apply to this. This is how you really start to implement change. Instead of sitting back, we as people of color need to get more involved with these agencies and above all, our communities to let them know we've had enough.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you've been so patient. I know Rep. Johnson said a quick comment, and we'll get right to you.
Just quickly, I wanted to point out something about the question that was asked before, and that is the police who were parked at Windham Heights. That's state police.
I believe so.
Yeah. I just wanted to point that out, so that, because in Windham and Willimantic, we have municipal police, we have state police, and we have university police. I think we might be the only place in Connecticut that has all three. Yeah. But the state police cover Windham Heights and have ever since I've been there. So it's very interesting. So I just wanted to point out the fact that it's more than one police force here.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of questions, just statistics. It was mentioned that a Hispanic person is twice as likely to be arrested in Willimantic. I didn't hear anything about black people. Do we have that data?
So before I got in the car and came up here today, I looked through our last report. The disparity in Willimantic is most significant for Hispanic residents of Willimantic. There is a disparity for black drivers being stopped, but the one that sort of bubbled to the top was Hispanic residents were twice as likely as white or black residents to be stopped by law enforcement. That was the context.
That's helpful. And then is there any data to indicate a difference between how women police officers and men police officers interact with people of color?
There isn't, not in Connecticut, there is nationally lots of studies that have been done about actually, there's a lot of studies that have been done about the race of the officer, the role that might play, the gender of the officer, the number of years of experience. And the only thing that more modern study that has been shown to really drive disparate treatment more so than the race of the individual being interacted with isn't the race of the officer, it isn't the gender, it isn't the years of experience. It's something that has been studied now for about 10 years called masculinity threat. And so it's been done all across the country. What they found is that officers that are more likely to score high on what's called a masculinity threat assessment, even if they have external racist tendencies, even if you had right? Let's say you scored higher on the assessment that would indicate your disparate treatment or your racial treatment of others, but low on the masculinity threat scale, you're actually less likely to use excessive force or violence when interacting with members of the public. So something we don't talk enough about is that idea of masculinity threat. Those officers that score higher on the masculinity threat scale tend to be those that are involved in more use of force incidents or dangerous sort of situations. In Connecticut, we only collect the unique ID of an officer, so we don't know their race, their ethnicity, their gender, and so it's not something we've been able to evaluate. But we have done an officer level analysis for every single one of those 28 departments that we identified. We go in and we evaluate. We don't know who they are, right? So we develop this, say, okay, you know, these are the officers that we've evaluated. They patrol the same area at the same time as all these other officers, but they stop 3 times as many, say, black drivers. We provide that information back to the department so that they can then evaluate how useful that information is.
Okay, what's a masculinity threat? Does that mean you're a more masculine officer, or it means you're more afraid of men than women?
No, it's just a term that's used for an individual that is more likely to react to having their authority questioned. And so they call it masculinity threat. It's just sort of the academic term. It's not, it's not finding men more threatening than women. It's actually more of an assessment of how you react to having your authority questioned. What they find is that those that score higher in that assessment are more likely to sort of overreact to having their authority questioned, are significantly more likely to use excessive force, are significantly more likely to be involved in lawsuits and have complaints filed against them than even officers that score higher on the sort of right. It's not called a racist assessment, but that's essentially what they try to compare it to.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll go, we're just going to, we've got kind of a line forming, which is nice, and so we're going to kind of just stick with the line on this right side here. So go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dagmar Knoll. I'm on the town council here in Windham, and I live in Willimantic. 2 things. First, I just wanted to make sure that everybody heard what former councilman James Flores said. He did mention that he has seen the Willimantic police just outside of Windham Heights, so just over the bridge, which is still their jurisdiction. So that's what he was saying. He didn't have the mic at that point. So my comment, and I read this because I'm better in writing. I commend you on your success curbing discriminatory police practices in Connecticut. I observed in your example of Newington, and then your second example as well, that changes in policy stopped unnecessary harassment of all motorists for minor mechanical issues, but it did not necessarily inoculate the community from underlying discrimination against racial and ethnic minorities that resulted in those populations being disproportionately targeted in the first place. So was this discrimination and who was stopped directly acknowledged and addressed by this and other departments once it was pointed out by your group, and if so, how? My concern is that latent prejudice is always looking for an opportunity to manifest. So while you saying, oh, you can't do this anymore because this is clearly not functioning for what you wanted to do, it stops the practice in that moment. This latent prejudice is just looking for another opportunity, another sort of discretion moment to come forward. Can you please address this?
But it's just to make sure I'm sort of understanding your question properly, right? It's sort of a question like, are we playing whack-a-mole? So we solve something over here, and it pop up somewhere else? Is that sort of?
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, that is a really good question, very sort of rational, right? If the tool A is taken away from law enforcement, will they just start, overusing tool B because they still want to achieve a particular result? And in some places that has been the case. Out of the 28 municipal police departments we've identified, the vast majority of them have, we haven't seen the disparity pop up yet in other areas, and we're always monitoring them. In a few we have. And in a few, really one in particular, they essentially told us to go away, and they continue to just do the practices that we told them was driving the disparity. You know, I think your other question is sort of like, has there ever been, right, some entity, this advisory board, our work, that has stood up and said, you know, practice A is racist or is clearly prejudiced. You know, I'll be honest, no, that's not a statement that we have ever made. I know in some places we've been criticized for maybe the approach we've taken, which has been certainly a softer approach in trying to, our goal has been, you know, at least my goal has been, how do I get the police department to come along, right? And so sometimes that means, you know, overcompensating, being overly sensitive, and that has frustrated a number of members of Mary Shaker, and she's on our advisory board and has engaged in these conversations now for 8 years. One of the frustrating things for me, we've moved past a little bit, is that we built a system, if I'm being completely honest, we built a system that predominantly accommodated law enforcement's concerns. Okay? I mean, that's the truth. And we still identify significant disparities. So we tried to work really hard because we really wanted police to come along with us. We tried to work really hard to accommodate them so that, you know, when we did our study, they could embrace it. And when we did our study, even after accommodating all the things they asked us to accommodate, they still, you know, basically said, no, we don't think disparities exist. That's really frustrating, right? We spent a number of years, you know, so for example, I always like to say, you know, police say, oh, you know, the way that you compare drivers to, you know, our driving population isn't accurate. Well, in my opinion, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, we actually undercount Black and Hispanic drivers because we assume in the vast majority of our methodology that Black and Hispanic drivers drive cars at the same rate as white drivers and have access to vehicles at the same rate. But we know from the census that Black and Hispanic communities are less likely to own their own vehicle or have as many vehicles in one household as a white household, and are more likely to take public transportation. So if you're a Black or Hispanic individual, you're assumed that you have a vehicle just as everybody else. And so even after all of these problems, right, are built in to sort of favor law enforcement, disparities are still found, and for a long time law enforcement has still sort of rejected even the fact that disparities exist. So it's frustrating is we're trying to get to a place where we can have a conversation about what we do about those disparities, how we address prejudice, how we address culture. As we've seen in some places, it's the culture of a police department. It doesn't matter what type of enforcement they do, the issue of the culture that needs to be addressed. But we're having a hard time in some areas even getting law enforcement to acknowledge that like a statistical disparity exists.
Then let me ask this a slightly different way, and you gave one example. I'm sure there are many similar models where you were able to point out that the stated goal was not being achieved, and therefore the policy ended. But has there ever been a positive model of positive self-reflection of the data that you shared, which I'm sure you've shared with many departments, that show there is actually discrimination happening here. There's no, you know, there's a huge difference in who's being targeted. Do you have any examples in the state of positive self-reflection, acceptance there's something going wrong, and a desire to correct it on those terms?
I would say that we have a number of police departments that we've identified that have acknowledged that the disparity exists and that discrimination can be playing a role. The hard thing has been that then the police chief looks and goes, what do I do about it, right? Because sometimes it's not as simple as saying, well, it's just these 3 officers and if you fire them, the problem will go away. Sometimes the problem is more complicated. The problem is, you know, sometimes the problem we see in some communities is what the community is asking police to do. And there isn't the political will from the community to push back against that. So a perfect example is in Weathersfield. You know, they're sort of, at this point, it's sort of notorious. We've identified them in every study we've ever done across every measure we've ever looked at. We've done more follow-up work, and they're basically a department that said, my community wants us to patrol the border of Hartford. And they want us to essentially keep people out of coming into Weathersfield because we don't want them to cause crime. And so you go back and you say, okay, that can't, right? The community isn't going to buy this argument. They're going to push back against that. And the community has basically said, yeah, no, yeah, that's true. We don't want to scare people from Hartford, so whatever we can do to make sure they don't come in and cause ruckus, we should do. But, you know, we've had far more police chiefs in the state of Connecticut understand the political climate and understand that that is not a tenable approach and have genuinely worked to address the disparity in their community. And is a great example, right? The chief there said a number of years ago, yeah, we have a problem. I see it now. I'm going to be sort of radical and do some things different that my guys aren't going to like. And he did it, and their disparity disappeared, and it sustained itself. And it wasn't easy. He got a lot of criticism for that. So, Madison, police chief, same thing. He came and said, yes, racial disparities exist. Yes, we know we have a problem. We're going to do whatever we can. What can we? Basically, Madison said, please tell us what we can do. So we did, and they did those. And the team. So we have those positive examples, and then we have a few that are less. Yeah, Rodney, and then we'll move to our next thing.
Also with this, why sometimes we say can't stand the time, because you have some police chiefs who just doesn't believe there's a problem in their community. They just don't believe that racial profiling exists. And that's a huge problem. So how do we address this? Is by the public's speaking up, coming to agencies like CHROs, coming to agencies like us, the NAACP. This is how we can start to make noise to implement change. But we need the community support and help with this.
So my stepsister lives in Seattle, and this question is probably for Representative Johnson. And they have adopted a policy there that if the police are found to have escalated a situation on a stop, that they cannot have that, if it leads to some kind of altercation, that it can't be a good stop. They can't judge it as a good stop if the officer was responsible for escalating the situation. And that can include if they're, I guess, known in the community for hassling people of color, and so they have kind of a reputation that would be considered part of whether or not they've escalated the situation. So I'm curious if you know if there's been any thought of going that way on policy here.
I think that what you're asking for is something that would be evidence-based, so you're going to have to create a fact pattern. You're going to have claims that would be filed against somebody, perhaps their Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. So you'd have to develop a fact base. You can't, the way that I would look at something like that is that you'd have to develop something that would show over and over again that this person, because they have to go to training, they have to do these things. I would suspect that if we had that circumstance, that when we hope that the chief would take care of the employment of that particular individual, and maybe not have it as an officer. So there are ways to handle it. People are not supposed to hassle folks. That's not what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be there to create peace in our communities. They're not supposed to be there to harass anybody unnecessarily, or to feel that they should be running around and stopping people. So those things sound to me like they're already something that they should not be doing here or anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's not how police should be behaving. It's just wrong.
My name is William Malwitz. I'm with the Easterns chapter of the NAACP. I'm a treasurer, and I have a question for Mr. Barone regarding the masculinity threat assessment as to its reliability and construct validity and how it was reached that it was indeed a good measure for what it intends to.
Okay, put me on the spot. There was a study done by John Jay College, and particularly the CPE, the Center for Policing Equity. It's been considered in the last number of years one of the better models. And I'm happy to find it and share it with you. The guy that runs the Center for Policing Equity is a guy by the name of Dr. Phil Goff. He's probably on TV a lot. does a lot of stuff on bias, implicit bias, explicit bias. So it's his work, and it's really one of the leading institutes currently in America in addressing police discrimination.
For that initial study, could you talk to me about the sample and its characteristics and size?
I can't because I had Dr. Goff came to Connecticut a few times, and he shared the results of the study. I read it a number of years ago, and I use it as an example, right, in forums like this, but I've never been questioned at that level, so please don't hold me to it. But like I said, I'm happy to share the study itself with you. But it has, by the time the study is published in a fairly credible academic journal and now has been replicated across other states, we can be fairly confident that the measures used were fairly good.
That's enough detail for me, thank you.
Thank you. Another question. And again, anybody else who has a question, come up.
Thanks for letting me speak again. So I do have a question actually about the same thing for you, and then I have a question for you, sir. And so my question about that is, at what level is this masculinity threat? Like, at what level do cops get removed from the force based on that test?
The example that Dr. Goff shared with us when he came wasn't this idea that officers were being removed. They used the test to try and help police departments craft different policies so that masculinity threat would play a smaller role in interactions that could lead to force. Let me give you an example. One of the policy changes that they had a department make in New Jersey was if you're an officer and you're chasing someone, right? Somebody's running from you and you're chasing them, your adrenaline is running, and those are situations, particularly with individuals that might score higher on the masculinity threat assessment, that might lead to more violence being used, or force being used, is the more appropriate way to say it, when an individual is apprehended. And so one of the changes that they made was they changed the policy within the department so that the individual who started the chase could not be the first individual to put his hands on the suspect when they were following. They had to find a way to apprehend them. Maybe they put a gun on them. Maybe they, and what that did was it removed, so the second or third person who may have been involved, who may be less emotionally invested, would be the person that would move in at that point when it was safe to do so to handcuff the individual. So by the way, you should know that when they do these tests and assessments, they're done blind, right? So it's not like Dr. Goff goes back to the department and says, these are all the people that scored high on a masculinity threat assessment, you should fire them. That's not how the study is done, right? In order for departments to participate, they're not going to know the names of the individuals used, and they're collecting data that's blind so they can do a credible study. So it was never intended to be able to go back and say to the department, you should get rid of these 5 guys. It was intended to say, we noticed that, here's a pattern that we're seeing, and we think that in this case, if you address how individuals are handcuffed by not having person A handcuff them, you'll drastically reduce excessive use of force. And in fact, in the case of this particular study, that's
Awesome. So I think it's very interesting that the first thing to use force or whatever was you mentioning to pull a gun on someone, because we all know how that ends a lot of the time. But my other comment was for you, Rodney. Thanks for being here. You made a comment about the FBI wanting to get more people of color to train with them and things like that. My question is, how do they, you might not know the answer, but how is it that the FBI, the police force and everything, reach out to people of color to join them when for decades, if not, well, actually a lot longer, the police force has been helping the KKK, has been contributing to mass incarceration of black and brown people. So how do you change that? How do you start getting people who are being killed by cops to actually join the police force and beyond that 20% diversity?
Good question. There are websites out, okay? And that's another thing about change. people in various branches of our law enforcement have realized the fact that things have to start to change. Not only local, but state and federal. We had a presentation done here just a few months ago by a couple of representatives from the FBI who I personally know are doing presentations in local high schools and colleges to try to recruit. This is how we make true diversity through our law enforcement, whether it's from the local cop, all the way up to the lawyers, all the way up to the representatives and the Senate. We, as people of color, have to take the initiative to start to get more involved. You know, because if we don't change anything, who's going to change it? I hope that helps.
Thank you.
My name is Henry Crane and I live in Willimantic. And some things, it was said earlier that you're twice as likely in Willimantic, I believe, and you can correct as you go, but this is how I got there. You're twice as likely as a Latino. I don't know if that's Latinos versus Latinos. I'm not worried about the breakdown. If you happen to be Latino, you're twice as likely to get arrested, pulled over, some negative interaction with a police officer. And what I have noted in the past, it was very well put out there that we have something on the order of, at that time, several years ago, because we have a different police chief now, 30% of our police force is at least presently Latino, and we hire maybe 2-3 cops a year for a 44 police officer force. So how do we fix that? It's got to be training, because simply populating everybody 44%, or your exact percentage of population, while it's laudable and wonderful, it's not necessarily all of what we need to do. We need a little bit more thought if we're going to be able to say you're twice as likely, if you're a given ethnicity, to get busted. We need to figure out how we fix that to at least get it to a more sound number than twice. Twice is unacceptable. And we need to get it closer to what you did, what your behavior was, and what modifiers we need to do to help people get that. If they're new drivers, if they haven't had a car, whatever it takes, we need to have a sane conversation of how to get from where we are to where we need to be, which is closer to what your percentile is, within reason what your behavior is. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Just a quick comment. I've trained 1,500 officers in implicit bias over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. One of the things that we've consistently learned is that, believe it or not, the race and ethnicity of officers doesn't matter when it comes to disparate treatment of minority individuals. And so what we found is that black officers are just as likely to disproportionately stop black drivers as white officers, as Hispanic officers, same with men and women, right? And so, which is interesting, because I do think, right, again, a logical person would say, you know, the race and ethnicity or gender of officers might play a role in disparities in traffic enforcement. We haven't found that to be the case, you know, in driving the disparity. And to your other point, you know, part of what I don't know in Willimantic is likely what is driving that disparity, particularly for Hispanic residents. It's likely going to relate to, my guess is if we map where traffic enforcement is being done in Willimantic, the areas it's being done, it's likely going to be related to exposure to police. So what we know is that when police are, people that are more likely to be exposed to police, meaning there's just more police where they drive or where they live, they're more likely to be stopped. And so some of what makes this issue complicated is, you know, we know that, you know, for example, housing discrimination also plays a role, right? We know that lower income housing and also, larger, right, apartment complexes, for example, they tend to gravitate more towards major thoroughfares. And we know that police patrol major thoroughfares at a greater rate than they do a more suburban, quieter area. And so, right, the exposure is already, right, you're already more likely to be exposed to a law enforcement officer just if you live near Main Street, right, as opposed to maybe 2 miles in. And so some of that plays a role, and that's part of what we're trying to figure out in one of the community, what degree is where police are patrolling, why they're patrolling that way. The other thing we know from research done not only in Connecticut but across the country is that virtually every single motorist violates a motor vehicle law within 60 seconds of getting behind the wheel of the car. Okay. And so law enforcement officers can find a technical reason to stop virtually anybody who goes out on the road that would hold up in court. And so you sort of also have to do away with this idea that one group violates motor vehicle laws more than others. That's not the case. We do know that younger drivers do speed at higher rates, right? But they don't speed more than other drivers. They're just going faster than other drivers, right? So the thresholds are different. Same is true for right, the example I used about registration laws. Same is true about equipment violations. We run tons of studies where police look for lighting violations in this neighborhood. They find them at the same rate as if they look at them in another neighborhood. So police tend to be able to find what they're looking for, where they're looking for it, and people are violating motor vehicle laws all the time because the motor vehicle laws were structured in that way. And so it's sort of frustrating when I hear often I have law enforcement say, well, I have a legal reason to pull that individual over. Well, you did. The question becomes, why do you only use that legal reason over here and not over here, right? And that's some of what we're trying to figure out.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Phillips. I'm a resident of Willimantic. And I have a question and a comment for Mr. Brown. An earlier speaker had mentioned the new Jim Crow. And it seems when you look at US history, what we see today, driving while black, is basically a contemporary version of the black codes that were put in place in the South, as you know, after the Civil War, and which prevented African Americans from moving freely in space. And that is a pattern that has remained in US history. So segregation, obviously we don't think of it this way, but segregation was a control of black people in space. So the thing that's unusual today is we still have a culture of control, but we don't have a legal system that permits it. So part of the problem is not political in that sense, it's cultural. Right? I mean, in other words, American culture is committed to the view that black and Latino people in public space is a threat to public order. And so one of the questions I have for you is how do we move against that? Because in one sense, I mean, the police will say, we're only enforcing the laws of society. And in a sense, that's true. The police are no better or no worse than the society. We get the police that we as a society deserve, because in the sense that if you look at what was going on in Ferguson really revealed the practice of profiling there was used in a deliberately racist manner. Everybody knew it within the police force. It was known in town, the counts people knew. It was so much more than a few bad apples on the police force. It was structural to the way policing was done in Ferguson. And there's some reason to assume that that happens to be the case in other states. I think the interesting thing about Connecticut is that Connecticut has a kind of robust set of laws to address this. But the question I have for you is and I think this Ferguson shows this, can this problem really be solved at the state level? Isn't this something for the federal government? I mean, because police departments are recalcitrant. We just have to admit that that is true. They are hostile to change. And they will only change if there's legal force brought to bear. So that's the question I have for you. Do you think that this really can be solved at the level of a few policies when it's deeply cultural and it perhaps requires a source of power that is greater than the state government?
Thank you. I'm going to answer quickly, and I actually think some of our panelists might want to weigh in because that was a really thought-provoking question, so thank you. Do I believe the problem can be solved at the state level versus the federal level? We have historically seen that it has been the feds. You can just look back to what precipitated this law being rewritten. This was the feds that came in and arrested a bunch of police officers in East Haven for violating people's civil rights, and that's what ultimately got that. And then the feds came in and sued them. Said, okay, we're going to sue you and put you under our thumb and force you to change it. It's very costly for the department. And so, from that perspective, yeah, the feds play an important role. Unfortunately, under this administration, that's not the case. This administration, even in Connecticut, has pretty much shut down the civil rights division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut. So, there were cases that we were working on with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the civil rights division, prior to this administration, where departments that weren't, they weren't responding in the way that we felt they should, and the behavior we thought was really something that needed to be addressed. And so the question was, who does that? It's typically been a role that the feds have been able to play, and unfortunately, under this administration, they won't play it. They don't play it. So we do need to get back to a place where the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice is working again. It's not working. It's not functioning, and that's really disappointing. We also need to get, I think, to a place where the state is better able to. Right now, the state, this law has very little teeth, right? So we collect data, we report data, and the teeth we have is basically public shaming. So I can go to a reporter and say, hey, we did this study and we found all these problems, and the department told us to go pound sand, right? And a lot of times, if we get to that point, that usually increases the wheels and gets things moving. But we don't have a Department of Justice. And so what we've seen across the country in the last number of years is some states have started to take on that role. California, their Attorney General has the ability now to essentially do what the feds did, which is to go in to sue a department to say, we're going to prove in court that we believe you're discriminating against group X. We're going to do it not only with data, but also with all these other measures, and then we're going to take over your department, we're going to force you to change. And so that's a bill that was a version of that bill was before the legislature last year to give our Attorney General Connecticut that power. And the bill didn't get very far. But we have to think in these times, with this current administration overseeing the Justice Department, what other levers are there to try and address this issue? Because historically the feds have played a much more significant role, and they're not. I don't know if anybody else wanted to weigh in on that.
And that's true. And the commission does receive and process individual complaints. So as all of this data has been collected and analyzed, and it presents a certain, collection of evidence which actions can be taken on, the complaints are also important because it does clarify and reveal certain conduct that's going on in different parts of the state. So it's really important that people utilize the commission and the complaint process to bring to light what it is that's been going on. And remind you that moving through the streets and living in our cities and our towns is a public accommodation. Everyone has a right to protection against discrimination in conduct of public accommodation. So you can file complaints. It does help.
I think that I just heard about how the federal government is kind of closed down the civil rights division is really very disturbing, and we're not aware of that. And I think that when you take a look at what happened, I mean, a lot of the back in the day, states' rights were really meant to. The idea behind states' rights was to make sure that the South could continue to really segregate and discriminate. And we had the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964, and what happened is we had federal authority to be able to go in and make sure the states were behaving themselves, that they didn't have this kind of discrimination. And so to hear that that is not happening with this administration, with the Trump administration, is very, very distressing. And it is something that, we need to probably let people know that this is a problem. And then maybe the legislation we talk about should be looked at, because I think that that is something that every state should do. I think that we've developed enough since 1964 where most states are going to behave in a way that is going to really want to make sure that people are treated fairly and that discrimination doesn't occur. So having that kind of thing in place. Also, if there's a move by the federal government not to take discrimination and this sort of thing as seriously as it has in the past, then the states need to step up at this point in time. So, yeah, this is very, very interesting.
And also, too, to get back to the culture, these are 50, 60, 100 years of stuff. Stuff. It's been around in America long before I was born and my parents. So the culture has to start to change. How do we start to change the culture? We start to change a culture by using the most powerful voice we have, the First Amendment, and not being afraid to speak up. See, these situations exist because the system also banks on fear. Fear of you not exercising your rights as a citizen to speak up on your behalf. Or else it's not going to work, or they're going to come and get me, etc. And they bank on this. So until we start to change as a culture, when something goes wrong, Martin Luther King said, and I hope I get his quote right, anytime there's an injustice and nobody speaks up, imagine what you do. So how can we implement change if you're afraid to speak? Because you're worried about repercussions. Just something to think about.
Thank you. We'll take the 7:30 hour. We've got people lined up. What I'd like to do is just end with people that are currently in line, give you an opportunity to make your comment or after. So we've got 4 people. We're going to have the last 4, and we'll try and wrap this up in the next 15 minutes. So with that,
just quick comment. When you're going to count the population of Willimantic, we came down to minority, you have to do 2 counts before 6 p.m., after 6 p.m. If you count the minority of Willimantic before 6 p.m., we are 5%, because we got people from all the around the area, 20 miles away from Willimantic. That means we Latino, Black, we are only 5%. Now, after 6 p.m., when they will go home, then we are 100% minority. But when you say that 40% people minority get stopped, it's a big proportion. I don't want to answer this comment. And my second comment is I want to promote my program, More Book, Less TV. If you're going to make a comment, whether or not you believe in racial profiling, please don't watch TV, read a book, go for more information. People say to me, it's not profiling Willimantic. I don't want to argue about it. I want you not to listen to your next door neighbor, go for that, go for information. Because somebody believes today that the moon is made of cheese. Because they don't want to read a book. You got people never read a book, but they keep their mouth open. In my case, I shut my mouth, I open the book. Thank you.
Good evening. Leah Rawls, resident of Willimantic and president of the Windham Willimantic NAACP. I'll take a moment to thank everyone for coming out to support this event. And I have a couple of questions and concerns. Number 1, is there any study being done on police chases? Particularly police chases with Black and Puerto Ricans that end up in death. Have we stopped to take a look at that policy? And how can we stop that? Because I thought I remembered there being a policy against police chase because of the nature of harm that could be brought to the community. I think that when there is a chase going on, as you said earlier, the adrenaline is flowing both for the chased and the chasee, and it ends up in death. How do we stop that policy? And have you all looked at that and looked at the data?
The state of Connecticut recently changed laws on police pursuits. They require the state to adopt a model policy, and then all municipal departments adopt that. And for the first time, they started collecting information on police pursuits. We are not involved in that. I believe that information goes to Sacred Heart University, and soon they're supposed to be publishing a report every year on every single police pursuit. One of the things that I've learned in doing this work is that the vast majority of municipal police departments have very strict policies on pursuits. They tend not to allow them. That is not the same for state police. State police tend to allow troopers to pursue vehicles much more often than local PDs do. So it's something that the state is only recently starting to collect information on and look at. I know the race of, and ethnicity and gender and demographic information of individuals involved in pursuits is part of the information that is now mandated to be collected and reported to Sacred Heart. But it's not something that I have, other than that.
Right, well, I want to put it on the record that the NAACP is very concerned about that. We've had a lot of motor vehicle stops that have ended in death, and we need to take a look at that. Secondly, this handy dandy card you handed out, I don't know about anybody else, but I have never seen one of these. Black, white, Puerto Rican, anybody? Okay. So, it's supposed to be handed out when you get stopped.
If you have been stopped after October 1st, 2013, you should have, you're legally mandated to hand you that card. That is very disappointing. Unfortunately, it's not the first time you've heard it. I can't tell you how many of those cards I've ordered and mail out to police departments with the assumption that they're handing them out. So what I would say, what I've done in the past is if an individual or community says we're not getting them, I get on the phone and I call the local police chief and say, people have been stopped, they're saying they're not getting them, what's going on? But it's sort of the honor system, and it's a hard thing to oversee. Since October 1, 2013, if you've been stopped, you should walk away with that card. Now, let me just put a caveat in there. In the last 2 or 3 years, if you've received a ticket, and it was an electronic ticket, so it was printed out, it wasn't handwritten, that information has been incorporated into the ticket, and it will be on the bottom of the ticket. So just
The one that you can barely see.
the electronic it should be on.
Okay. And last, I want to say on behalf of the community that I think it is concerning that our police chief is not here and no representative from our police department is here. I mean, how can we have this conversation and it be productive and solution-based if we don't have a representative? And I think that, we need to call that on the carpet. For whatever reason, it's not responsive to the taxpayers of this city. And so I appreciate, your efforts in trying to make that happen, but I think that our policymakers in the town, that's what I was trying to say, our policymakers in the town, who are responsible for setting policy with our police department, need to take heed to that and make some comments and some decisions around that. I mean, this was a voluntary effort, but I think that if you want to say you don't have any problems, then the best place to say it is at the table. And if you can't come to the table, then it's suspicious to me. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Brenda Bookbinder, I'm a resident of Willimantic. I'm a member of the NAACP and AFT 5052 union member. I am here for looking at the proud community that is here tonight as a sign of hope. I can't imagine what it is for a person brought over by an officer with a gun and a badge, pulling someone over and making a judgment about them, not knowing them, and making assumptions. Institutional racism is fought, or any institutional hedonism is fought one-to-one, looking in the eye, talking to them. Everybody matters, everybody votes who can, who wants to. I find the statistics very cold. I know they're necessary, but my daughter was pulled over in Hartford. She went very early in her Jeep. In a Jeep at the time. I was working at a camp in the North End. They assumed she was carrying drugs. They whisked her out of the car, they frisked her, they bound her hands. She was shaken and crying for days. For everybody who's gone through something like that, the scars last a very long time. There's such a thing with social justice as being too little and too late. This town did something very interesting with the Heroin Town articles in the paper. We did study circles, and I suggest we do that format here. That we had groups of 30 people, about 5 of them, meeting in a variety of places, not only to talk about statistics, but the impact of what was happening on families, on schools. And we know the hate starts a lot earlier than adulthood. It starts very early. So what's happening in our schools, what's happening with our fire departments and our police departments, that they're turning a blind eye to this. And they are not here, and that is a statement, isn't it? That they're not here. This was in the paper. This was an important thing to do. So anybody interested in doing study circles, it's a really marvelous format. I was in one of them for the Heroin Town articles. There were some real policy changes in the town, and that's how it happens. So I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and hopefully we help each other with some hope here and some real solutions to this.
All right, we'll get to Mayor last comment, which is not our advisory board, so 2 more comments, and then hopefully people hang around and continue this discussion.
Good evening. My name is Paul Hongo. I'm the research director for the town. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but Ken and Ron, you probably saw me shaking my head a lot. I don't talk about it because it made me sick to my stomach. But I actually worked for Mayor April Capone from 2007 to 2011. I know all about East Haven. It was my exposure to discrimination. I never saw anything like it in my life. I go home and tell my family how much it disgusted me, how human beings could treat others so disrespectfully, just because of their color. And East Haven was about Hispanics. I swear to God, if they could have built, and you talked about the community, you are so right, that community was in denial. And I was the mayor's chief of staff. I went to every town council meeting on her behalf. I reported out, I worked with the Department of Justice, I worked with the FBI. I still have files downstairs that I keep close to me because of what I went through, okay? Death threats. You know, we lost an election by 34 votes. Not that I care, elections come and go. We lost by 34 votes because nobody wanted to believe us. I went into executive session with the town council. I can tell you stories all night about the number of people that would come to the mayor's office, come see me, with photos, with information, with letters. And it started from the top on down. The chief, I would tell Chief Leonard Gallo, here's another example, here's another example. He never called me by my first name. He called me, it was always Hongo. You're full of it, Hongo. They would take the photo, and they would take the paperwork and throw it in the garbage. Okay? It does start at every level, Rodney, I agree with you. No, there's no one answer. There's no one answer. It starts from the top with the feds, state, local. It's your voice. People have to reach out. If there is a problem, and I've seen the extreme. I've seen the extreme in the state that made me sick to my stomach. Okay? Reach out to who you're comfortable with. I'm the HR director. Feel comfortable, come to me, come to me. If you feel comfortable, come to any one of the people on the panel, do so. You have local representatives, you have state representatives, but you know, it goes back, and I do have a union background. An injury to one is an injury to all. So you can't remain silent. If there is a problem, let's deal with it. And unfortunately, East Haven, it was decades. It went on decades. And the people did speak. It took the Department of Justice a long time to get in there and clean it up. So I know firsthand about it. And like I said, there's no easy answer, there's no one answer. It's a collaborative effort on everybody. Everybody has a voice, everybody can speak up and say, hey, look, if injustice has occurred, we need to address it. It's not right. It's not right to treat people like that. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Tamara, who is a member of our advisory board and state NAACP.
And just to build on what you were saying, I wanted to let the people in the room here have the power if you use your voice. I want to give an example. As Ken said, I am the former criminal justice chair for the state of NAACP State Conference, where I went around to branches all over the state, and I was working in one particular community. We went to the Justice Department. We had public forums where we gathered hundreds of complaints about a particular police department, and we gave it to the Justice Department. And we demonstrated patterns of bad practices over and over again that were completely ignored. But that police department changed, not because of the Department of Justice, but because of the community and the mayor in that community and the new chief in that community. And so where we went from, as an NAACP unit, almost a weekly complaint, rarely do we get complaints now. So the difference in that case was with the residents and the local leadership. So I know that I did see, or I think I saw someone who is a local city council person, but as Leah had said earlier, there's absolutely no reason why there's not a member of the Willimantic Police Department here. But you, as residents, have the right to ask that chief, where was he tonight? And hold the police department accountable. You have the power in the room, not the chiefs. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much for that comment. And just as we round out, Rodney asked me just because of the comments that Leah made, if I could just share our efforts to invite the local department. We have reached out to the local state police in the UK, Eastern Connecticut State University, although they only make maybe 30 traffic stops a year, and the local Willimantic Police Department. We did let them know that this is our 7th forum. It's just customary for us to invite a representative from the local department to participate and sit on the panel so that right, that's just an important part of these conversations. And in the past 6 forums, that's always been the case, and so we're grateful for that. Just, we reached out to the chief a number of times. I did receive a message from him this afternoon, and so just so that, I don't take his words out of context, I'll just share with you, his message to me, which is that first he thanked me, thanked us for hosting this event here at Willimantic, and indicated that he's had discussions in the past with the local NAACP chapter, and he currently has no concern that any members of the Willimantic Police Department are engaged in profiling. He also indicated that Willimantic Police has not been identified in the past through our research, which is true. I'll just read the next paragraph 24. It is not only a police chief, but also a minority member of the community. I would not stand for racism or bias to permeate among the rank and file of the Willimantic Police Department. Furthermore, the department takes pride as a department with strong community relations and holds events such as the Citizen Academy, the Youth Leadership Program, to bridge the gap of all community members. And he had an open invitation to folks wanted to discuss some of the programs that the Willimantic Police Department offer to try and connect with the community. And he indicated he was unable to attend tonight, but that he would not stand for any officer in this department to so that's the message I received this afternoon, and just in the spirit of transparency, that's just so with that, I would first like to thank and give a round of applause for our 3 wonderful panelists for agreeing to sit up here and share some thoughts. I'd like to thank everybody who came out and spent your precious time with us here this evening. We'll hang around a little bit afterwards if you have questions. Take some food home with you because I don't want to.
thank you all for coming. And we hope to be back and have this not be a one-time thing, but that these will be sort of ongoing conversations that we have throughout this